I'm Steve with Motive Gear, and I'm here with
Tyler Garrett with Tom's 4x4 Superstore out of Chattanooga, Tennessee.
And we've got a customer here who's got upgraded to big tires, and we'll be putting in theirs today.
Alright, so factory, this Jeep's got 321s in it. We're going to take those out, we're going to re-gear it to a 488, and we're also going to install some Powertrax gear top ends and slips today.
And 10 factory axles?
Yep, 10 factory axle shafts, front and rear, and we'll get this thing ready for whatever he wants to tackle in it.
Okay, let's get started.
Alright, sounds good. We currently have our axle shafts pulled, unit bearings off, diff covers off, drive shafts out, ready to go. This is where we're actually getting into the meat of the gear install. Here you can see the factory ring gear. As I said, it's a 3:1 ratio. The factory differential carrier. These are the factory spider gears. That's your cross pin. This one is currently an open differential, and we are putting in Powertrax limited slip. Alright, we are pulling off the factory inner pinion bearing because we are going to measure the factory shim and give us a starting point for installing the new gears. If you had to guess where to start, I believe Motive in their install instructions does give you a list of factory pinion shim depths. If you don't have anything to start with, like if you had a bare housing and you're trying to put gears in it, you go by that to get an idea, but that's just a rough estimate. You still have to check your pinion depth and check your pattern and all that. So we're going to use this shim as a starting point and then move on from there. All right, here we have our Motive Gear install kit. It comes with all new bearings. We got backlash shims, which is carrier shims. We have pinion depth shims. We have a new crush sleeve, a new seal, ring gear bolts, silicone. Pretty much everything you're going to need to install it. Okay, this is your factory pinion shim. It goes here and then your bearing. So it's like that. So you would transfer this and your new bearing onto your new pinion. Press this bearing on. You need a press and an actual bearing driver to do that. And then you'll test fit that without a crush sleeve. Just kind of snug it up, get it in there. Check your pinion depth with the pinion depth tool. And if you're good, then you will install your ring gear onto your carrier, put that into the housing and do a pattern check. If everything checks out good, you're going to pull it all back apart, reinstall your new crush sleeve, and put it together for final assembly. We've got our new carrier bearings. We're going to go ahead and press all of our bearings on. We'll start with the carrier since the press is set up for that. Just set it on there, make sure everything's lined up good, and press it on. Now we're going to press our pinion bearing on. We've got our pinion shim in here. Alright, so now that we've got our bearings pressed onto our carrier and our pinion, we're going to go ahead and put the ring gear onto the carrier and get that ready to go. It is very, very critical that when you do this step that you make sure that everything on this ring gear is clean. You want to put brake cleaner in all the holes and let it set for a few minutes. Really make sure it dissolves any kind of oil contamination. Then you're going to take an air nozzle and just blow all those out. Your bolts, ring gear bolts. If I just send you new bolts, be sure you clean them as well. They have an oil film out of the packaging, and the reason for that is your Loctite won't stick to oil. So you need to make sure everything is clean and dry. When you put this on, you just want to make sure everything's lined up, all your bolt holes are lined up. Start 3 or 4 of them, get all of them started by hand before you proceed to fully tighten it. Once you get it started, I kind of like to put a little red Loctite on the remaining ones and put them, get them started, then take the first 2 or 3 back out, put Loctite on them and start them back. So that it's just kind of a process of you allow the first 2 bolts to hold it up there while you start the other ones, and then pull those out and put the Loctite on them, and then you can go ahead and tighten it up. I use just a little electric impact to run them down, and then I torque them with a torque wrench to the spec provided with the install instructions. And that's pretty much it. Once you do that, you're ready to start putting everything into the housing. All right, so once you get your ring gear bolts tightened, run up, then you want to use some soft jaws in a vise. Soft aluminum will be fine. Just go ahead and loosely clamp your carrier in the vise, and then following the specs on your install manual, you'll want to torque all your ring gear bolts in a crisscross pattern, just like you would a wheel. And once that's all done, then you're ready to put it in the Jeep. All right, so now we're about to test fit our pinion gear. It's all assembled with our bearing on, our pinion shims. We've got new races and a new oil baffle already installed in the housing. So we'll test fit this, and then once this is in there, we're going to install it without the crush sleeve, just for our test fit. Once it's in, we'll take our pinion depth gauge and measure everything, make sure it's right. If you notice, there's usually a measurement on the bottom of the pinion that tells you what the depth is supposed to be. And then the 2-digit number is just going to be your gear set, so that they match. The ring gear will have that same, like this was number 15. The ring gear will have a 15 on it as well. That way you always keep the gear set matched. So you just use this one's 2.227, and that's what we want our depth to be. So once this is installed, we'll check it and make sure it's right. Alright, so you put your pinion back in there. Again, without a crush sleeve, you don't need to have a seal in it or anything. You just want to put your bearings on it and your yoke and your nut. Just tighten it up where it's snug. It doesn't need to be very tight. If you can turn it by hand, it's probably good. You just want to really make sure your bearings are seated. So once you've got your pinion in there and you're happy with the amount of preload, like I said, it just needs to be kind of snug. You need to be able to turn it by hand. You're not trying to crush the bearings. You just want to make sure that they're seated good. You'll install your pinion depth gauge tool. It's just a dial indicator with these aluminum pucks that center everything up, and it actually measures the depth. When you install it, be sure you put your caps on properly. If it's a Dana axle, it will be lettered on the caps, and it matches the casting. So you'll have, like this one is U and it's turned sideways, and this is a U that's upside down. So it's the same letter, but they're turned opposite directions so that you can't mix the caps up. It's very critical that these go back where they go. So once you do that, you just snug those up again. Don't have to be super tight, just kind of hand snug. And you're gonna measure this right on the money, right there. So once you verify you're at the proper depth, you can go ahead and install your carrier for a test fit. You wanna run a pattern on it. Make sure that the pattern corresponds with your measurement, in that the pattern is proper. And so we're gonna go ahead and pull this back out and install our carrier and mark it and check everything there. And if it's good, we're good for final assembly. All right, so our preload was a little loose on our bearings, and then also we had too much backlash. So I was able to keep the stock shim on this side, build a new shim pack for the passenger side, and we added 9 thousandths to that overall thickness compared to the stock one. And doing that, we've got a really good preload on our bearings. You can slide it in by hand. Really kind of have to take a little plastic mallet and kind of help it go, but it's not too much. It's going to kill the bearings. But by doing that, now we have exactly 6 thousandths of backlash, which is what's on the gear, so it's ideal. And then once you got that, you can pull that off, and you are ready to check your pattern. So you open up your marking compound, squeeze a little bit out and put it on your brush. You just kind of want to paint the teeth like so. Make sure you get a good, smooth, even coating on there. All right, so now we've got our carrier installed, marking compound on there, and now we're gonna take a drill set on low, and I just stick it on the pinion nut and rotate everything so that it'll mark that compound and give us our pattern reading. You'll need to take your hand and be careful not to get caught up in it, but just apply a little bit of resistance to that ring gear so it's not bouncing around, and just spin it slow. Go around a few times. Alright, so we went reverse and forward to give us our pattern on our drive and coast sides of the gear. Alright, This is why we check it. Currently the pinion is too shallow. So you can tell that by the way it's marking on the tooth. Imagine it as an arrow. So if you look closely, you can see that that dark spot is rounded and it's kind of pointing towards the inside of the gear. So that means that the pinion gear needs to go deeper into the ring gear. Looking at it, it's about 4 to 5 thousandths off. It needs to go deeper. And when we do that, we'll have to reset our backlash, but that should bring that pattern into where we want it. You saw we checked it with the pinion depth tool to verify we're correct. And this is now with, so we ended up having to bring it in quite a bit to get a desirable pattern. But as you can see, our pattern's real flat and smooth. There's no high points. We've got 6 thousandths of backlash, exactly like Motive specifies. And everything's good. This will be a long-lasting gear. Okay, so here's your outer pinion bearing. And then you have this, it's a hardened shim almost. It helps retain oil on this and keeps the yoke from wearing on the surface of the bearing. So that goes there, and then it goes in, and then your seal would go over that. So before you install your pinion seal, you want to make sure that you put a light coat of grease on the inside of the seal. This just lubricates the yoke as it goes in, keeps it from burning the seal up before any oil can get to it. Just, you know, don't take a whole lot, just enough to keep it from getting too hot and being dry. And most of the Motive seals have a thin layer of sealant already around the outside. If it doesn't, just put a light bead of silicone on it before you drive it in there, and that just makes sure you don't have any leaks around the outside of the seal. Alright, so this is your new pinion nut. You always want to make sure that you install a new nut on your final assembly. Do not use it when you're setting everything up, because you want this nut to be fresh and get a good bite on the locking area on your final assembly. To check your preload on your pinion bearings, which is your crush sleeve, you'll need a digital type or non-clicker type torque wrench. One with a dial is fine, or a digital one, something where you can see how tight it actually is. Clicker type won't work because you're actually trying to see how much pressure it takes to rotate that pinion. So we've got a snap-on digital inch-pound torque wrench here. We're going to stick it on here and just rotate it a little bit and just kind of watch and see where we are. And we are between 15 and 16 inch-pounds right there. And then I think the spec is 11 to 16 on this particular axle, so we're right where we need to be. Alright, so after you get everything installed and you're happy with your pattern, really the only thing left to do is button it up, put your diff cover back on. You can take a wire wheel or a Scotch-Brite pad and clean all the old silicone or sealant off. Some differentials have a gasket, you can scrape it off. Generally, if they come factory with a gasket, Motive will send you a new gasket. If not, they'll give you a tube of silicone, and you can just, put a thin bead around it. Make sure your housing's clean, and once you're satisfied with everything, just stick it up there, put your bolts back in, tighten it down. You're good to go. Okay, these axle seals press into the outer end of the tube, and basically they keep mud and water and other debris out of the axle tube, which helps prevent damage to the inner seals that hold the oil in the housing. So these are very important, especially if you're in a harsh environment where there's a lot of sand or mud or salt and stuff like that that's going to get in there and contaminate the inner seals and cause damage to them. I like to go ahead and put my axle shafts back in and everything and install the gear oil last. That way the silicone has time to kind of tack, and you don't have any leaking issues there. So for break-in, I like to just put in cheap 80-90 gear oil, and then after the first 1,000 miles or so, maybe then change it out. Since these lockers or limited slips are gear type, we don't have to add any kind of special additives. If it was a clutch style limited slip, you would want to add limited slip clutch modifier. And so we're just going to go ahead and fill this thing up and put the power cylinder thing back on. We'll take it out for a test drive.